Since the early 1980s, home prices in Canada have risen an astonishing 700%, while wages, comparatively, have only risen by 24%. My question to you is this sustainable? Or are we on the verge of some kind of major reset? I guess one of the things we have to consider is what's happening to affordability. We definitely have condos oversupplied, and we have crumbling investor confidence. Let's break it down. When we look at wages versus price growth, there's a 43-year disparity. Real wages, when adjusted for inflation, have grown a meager 0.5% on an annualized basis since 1981. It's effectively nothing. It's not even the rate of inflation. Home prices, on the other hand, have exploded, particularly in Vancouver and Toronto. To translate this into layman's terms, the average Canadian home has become more than 7 times harder to buy relative to the income that you're earning. We've heard it so many times. We see it in social media. We've got the boomer generation that has said, well, I was able to buy a home. I was able to buy 2 homes back in the 1980s, and interest rates were at 12 to 22%. Right, but the income to the cost of the asset was about 3 times. We're now sitting at well beyond 10 times that. In fact, the average income in Vancouver, average household income in Vancouver is about $90,000, and the average single family home is about $2 million. When you look at that, it's about 21 times the average annual income, household income, to the value of real estate. What's more is there's been a bit of an investor illusion as well. For 40 years, real estate was treated as the can't miss investment. With low rates, loose lending practices, and rising prices, investors flooded the market. And why wouldn't they? And I wouldn't blame them entirely. We have to blame the people who created the framework for this to happen. I mean, some of the loose lending practices were incredible in the 1980s and 90s. And when you look at this and you consider now, we've got historic upward momentum that appears to be reversing. We've got declining rents, higher vacancies, underwater investors, especially in the condo market, and what's worse is incredibly high unemployment rates that we typically see only in a recession. So why haven't we been calling a recession? In Toronto, there's currently 58 months of inventory in the pre-sale market. Sales have all but evaporated, and new project launches have collapsed entirely. In Vancouver, multifamily building permits have dropped sharply, so much so, there's nearly a $1 billion deficit in April alone. The future of housing shortage is quietly building here too, but we probably won't feel that for another 4 to 6 years. But we will likely see this cycle repeat itself again, only I think it'll be more violent, and it'll be sharper, and it'll be shorter. And this appears to be consistent if you look at historical momentum. Typically, Canadians have relied on central banks or rate cuts to save the day when it comes to real estate investment. Markets were expecting several rate cuts in 2025, but sentiment has largely shifted, and along with that, the US president has also complicated the fact with tariffs. Now, only one more rate cut is expected in 2025. We'll see how that unfolds. Even if mortgage rates fall to the high 3s, 3% range, like 3.8, 3.9, it's still not enough to reignite demand given how unaffordable prices remain, and it gets more complicated from there. Youth and first-time homebuyers are in full-on crisis. The youth unemployment rate hit 20.1% in May. This is the highest in nearly 25 years, and income growth isn't just slow, it's being entirely diluted by mass amounts of immigration, limited job opportunities. Housing affordability for the next generation is basically non-existent, and that is now going to delay the formation of households, and it will slow demand. And what's more is the government's fix, instead of creating an environment where young people can create wealth for themselves through investing in real estate, the idea now is to provide state funded housing. So, how on earth are people going to build their wealth in Canada when you have, as an example, your primary residence is free of capital gains? So, this is starting to fall into what feels like neo feudalism. I mean, if you go back to feudalism, typically you had to be of a very, very small demographic that had a large amount of wealth, and you would live off, peasants would live off the land and pay their taxes to the landowner. Well, that doesn't feel all that dissimilar now, especially considered where we're heading. So, if we can't create wealth through housing, and the only way that young people are really going to buy homes is if their families provide them with an opportunity to either have the capital or the house. So, if this doesn't correct, we're not just in a housing crisis, we're entering a new form of neo feudalism. It's no longer just about prices, it's about generational access to property, wealth, and mobility. And it's not great in the rental market either. Rents have now been declining year over year for 8 straight months. While that decline is modest, it signals to investors that the market is continually under pressure. And if prices stop rising and rents are falling, well, then there's nothing less for investors to come in and help stimulate the economy, because they're not going to buy an asset that's going down in value that doesn't service debt. It's just impossible. So I guess this all culminates to a question. Are we in the calm before a stormy correction right now? Prices have been largely stable month over month, but this may be creating a false sense of calm. Sales volumes remain unequivocally weak. Inventory is building with some momentum here, and the fundamentals of the overall market continue to deteriorate. You have to ask yourself, is a correction inevitable? Well, it's not quite that simple. Nonetheless, we've built a housing system, I truly feel, that no longer serves the people as it was meant to. Prices just can't keep rising forever, or our purchasing power can't just keep deteriorating forever. I'm going to paint one last picture for you before I sign off here. When you consider the US as an example of this, when you look at how we typically solve these problems, it's by printing a lot more money. That's usually the gap between the problem and the solution. There's a shortfall of money. And in the US, as an example, it's total taxable revenue that the government can pull in from corporations, foreign entities, all of its citizens, amounts to $4.92 trillion. At least it did in 2024. But there was a deficit of $6.75 trillion, or a shortfall of $1.83 trillion. Now, hear me out for a second here. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing in the US reported that in 2024, it averaged printing $541 million every 24 hours. That's $22.5 million an hour that is getting printed. And when you look at that over the entire year, that's $1.95 trillion that's being printed. So how is the government solving this problem? Well, they're just printing money at infinitum. And what does that do? It reduces the value or the purchasing power of every single dollar that's currently in circulation by the amount at which they're printing. So if you've got 4.9 trillion in revenue, 6.75 trillion is a deficit, and you're printing 1.95 trillion, that's about 28%. The question I have is your purchasing power going down by 28%? Or are you more likely to believe your government that CPI rates are about 3%? Especially when you exclude the volatile items that you buy every day. Nonetheless, when you now factor in that the US has a $36 trillion debt and $1.1 trillion every year is spent on interest payments, To me, it feels like the problem is going to get worse, and I'm not entirely sure how it gets better. Nonetheless, do you think home prices will keep rising, or are we due for a reckoning? Please subscribe to the channel for more weekly real estate insights and how US monetary debt, Canadian monetary debt is affecting the entire real estate market here in North America.